Why is it important to have a certain distance of air above your suspended ceiling when you're dealing with porous sound absorbers? That's what we're going to talk about today. So let's say that you have a room, something like this. Oh, it's a pretty long one. We want to have more like a shoebox shape, something like that. And typically you have sound absorbers in the ceiling, and they might be suspended like so, and it's like this, typically mineral wool of some kind, 20 to 40 millimeters thickness on these ones, and 200. But however, sometimes there's many reasons. One of them could be installations that you maybe you have some large installation that cannot fit inside this cavity, or you have many of them that needs to go below the ceiling. So what do? Well, in such cases, you're probably tempted to just give it less suspension, put it up a little bit. So let's say we put it at 100 instead, and then we can fit our big installation ducts or whatever beneath that. And I've often heard the argument that we can perhaps do some compensation on the walls. So let's add some wall sound absorbers here to compensate for that. However, it's a bit complicated, because if you look at the sound absorption properties and with regards to the thickness of a sound absorber, so let's say that this is the structure of the building, the frame, the hard ceiling above, and then if you compare that, if you have a thin layer of sound absorber, like 40 millimeters, and then if you have a thicker one, let's say 100 millimeters. If we look at these two, 40 and 60, and then if we then consider the absorption coefficient with regards to frequency here, this is a factor between 0 to 1. 0 means that you have no absorption, everything bounces back pretty much. Or if you have 1, everything is absorbed and turned into heat when it hits the sound absorber, but usually there's somewhere in between 0 and 1. But for a sound absorber like these ones, 40 and 60 millimeters, if we first take a look at the 60, it's gonna be, they will both have not that impressive performance in the very lowest frequencies, but then it's gonna go up and approximate pretty close to 1. And then if we look at the thinner one, 40 millimeters, it'll have more of this shape. And this has to do with the wavelength of the sound. So with the higher frequencies, the higher you go, the shorter the wavelength. And if you have a short wavelength, let's say it's something like this. Oh man, that's a really bad drawing of a wavelength. Something like that. Now we can see the wavelength is short with relations to the 40. And if you take the same wave, in this case, it's also going to be really short. So this will have very good sound absorption. And now we're up in this area. If we instead take a look at a wave that is more like this. I think I might need to zoom out a little bit. Why is it so hard to draw a wavelength? Let's do it a third and final time. It's a long one at least. Now, if we consider these two, in this case, it's still the 100 porous absorber will have an effect on this wavelength. It also relates to how much particle velocity you have in the wave, but I think that's a topic for a different video. The important thing here is that the 100 absorber will work, but if you take this same wavelength and compare it to the thinner I want to cry, they're so ugly, my sound wavelengths. It's actually pretty difficult to draw them. It's the same. Forget it, I give up. in relation to the 40 millimeters, this wavelength is very, very large, so it's just gonna go through it. It's like it's not even there, and that's why this curve shifts in this direction. The thinner you go, if you would take a 20 millimeter sound absorber, you would go even further here. And if you would use the typical suspended ceiling, where you take, for instance, a 40 millimeter and you suspend it to 200, well, in that case you will get probably, let's see, what color should we use? Let's use the rainbow color on this one. Then you can go even lower in frequency, something like that. Now, what happens here is if you decrease the height, the cavity depth of this sound absorber in the ceiling, you will not have much of an effect on the higher frequencies. But on the lower frequencies, what you actually do, let's say that this room has an area, the floor area on this room is 60 square meters. What you're doing, because the walls are typically hard and the floor is hard, so what you're doing here is that you're reducing the sound absorption in this low frequency range. It's like you're removing 60 square meters of good performing sound absorber and you're replacing them with 60 square meters of low performing sound absorber in this frequency region. So what do you have to do then? If you're going to compensate with sound absorbers on the walls, where can we find the missing 60 square meters? It's going to be very difficult to find them on the walls because we have windows, we have whiteboards, we have television screens, and we have doors and other kinds of furniture. So that's why I always start with a ceiling. It's very important to get a good ceiling in a room because that's the space that's the place in the room where you have area, where you have enough square meters to actually make an impact. And if you're gonna do something on the walls, you still have the same problem here, that these ones that you can't use thin sound absorbers on the walls. You will need thick ones. Perhaps you could use something with wooden panels with mineral wool behind them, like this. If this is a wall now, but still, this will grow and eat up your floor space. So it's can be a difficult solution. But if you find this 200, it's like the golden zone. 200 to 400 is a good zone to be. Try to avoid going less than 200 or more than 400, because then you will introduce other kinds of problems. And this is especially important if you're dealing with schools and educational rooms, because there you have stricter requirements in this frequency region. So you might get away with a simpler solution in an office or something, but in a school it's going to be critical. So in today's video I'm wearing a pretty fail-safe combination: green, gray, light brown, blue, and then this little splash of orange. It's kind of impossible to go wrong with it. It's one of my favorite combos. And if it's with my green eyes, green and green, it's green and orange. I really like it. It's a good combo. So if you got green eyes, you should try it. See ya.